Well, with all of my artistic studies, it's primarily been a process of observation of good historic examples. I'm pretty well traveled, and visiting old churches in Europe, I think, is the best way to learn about these things. Not just visiting historic Orthodox churches, but visiting old churches in general, wherever you might be, is a great way to absorb the liturgical ethos, the sort of the quality of sacredness that we feel in a physical structure. And so I'd say that's primarily been my education, is just observing things that are old and beautiful. I do have academic degrees as well. I studied art and architectural history undergraduate, and I have a master's degree in architecture. And these degrees are important for organizing one's thought and having a rigorous method of practicing design. But when it comes to Orthodox liturgical art and architecture specifically, I can't say that an academic education has a great deal to offer. It's mostly a matter of worshiping in old churches and feeling in your heart what is it that may make the presence of God feel real there, and trying to discern how it is that stone and wood and paint can actually foster that supernatural experience.
So do like mathematics and dimensions and things like that, are those things that you study? Do you do measurements of Byzantine churches in Serbia or Russian churches to see how that works?
I have indeed, yeah. One of the hardest things with design, particularly when you're trying to design in a historic style, is to get an accurate sense of scale. One of the reasons that so many contemporary buildings are unsatisfactory is that the scale is wrong, that the details are too large, the elements that they're built from are overscaled, they seem inhuman. And so, yeah, I have spent time with measuring tapes in old churches, making sure that, I actually understand how big is the space I'm looking at, so that, if I have a job to design a church of a certain size, and I think, well, maybe I should base it on this or that historic place I've been, I always try to test it in real scale to see is that precedent I'm looking at actually an appropriate precedent for the scale I'm working at. What sort of texture of details and building blocks do we see in these historic churches that give them that sense of human scale. And one thing I'm usually trying to do is make sure that the scale that I use is how to put it, the building should look like it could be bigger than it is, rather than the other way around. That is to say that the buildings that we are most attracted to are buildings that seem like they're smaller than they should be. The sort of dollhouse effect, that it's such a darling little building. It looks like that building could be twice as big, but they put all of that ornament and beauty and handcraft into something that's only this big, that's a small structure. And those are the buildings we find really attractive. Whereas conversely, when a building seems larger than it ought to be, like, it has not enough detail, not enough ornament for its huge scale, that's when a building, seems, as they say, not human scaled, like not enough effort was put into it for how huge it is. And that again is most typically the problem with contemporary buildings. Even contemporary classical style buildings usually seem under-detailed and overscaled, like they're built for giants. And so, yeah, that's my process, trying to make sure that buildings seem a little bit like they're children's toys as architecture goes, because that's what makes them seem lovable. Well, for someone who wants to do traditional style architecture, there are educational programs that teach that at quite a high level. There's Notre Dame's School of Architecture, which teaches traditional classical design as a master's program, and here in Charleston, the American College of the Building Arts teaches classical architectural design as an undergraduate program. So I can highly recommend either of those programs. I can also recommend extensive travels to Europe, just drawing old buildings, visiting old buildings, and trying to absorb that ethos into your heart. And I can also recommend working on a construction site or apprenticing yourself with maybe an alternative builder, someone who has revived building out of a traditional system like timber frame or load-bearing brick. There are a number of alternative builders like that in the country who take on apprentices and train them in traditional construction practices. And I think a combination of those two, a sort of academic training in classical design and drafting plus construction site apprenticeship experience is kind of critical to being able to design buildings. Architecture is a very difficult profession. It requires a kind of white-collar academic set of knowledge and disciplines, knowledge of art history, knowledge of building sciences, structural engineering, insulation, mechanical systems, and so forth, things that you can really only learn in school. But then it also really it requires an understanding of how things are made, how you build stuff on a construction site, what does each tool in a workshop do, how do you join wood together in ways that won't fall apart, what are all the finishes that are available, and how do you tell people what to do to get the finish you want. And this can only be learned from just making things yourself, working in a workshop or on a construction site. So yeah, it requires a lot of years of training to be able to do this. It also requires a kind of an innate aesthetic sense and a talent for drawing. So it's something that takes a real commitment. Not everybody can do it.
Did years burn out those words? Did a voice whisper absurd? Did your mind comprehend and ask if you'd last till the end? Traded money and lands, family dreams and plans, for a desert exile and a life of trial.